We're going to get started. Baltimore City Council Ways and Means Committee. I'm Eric Costello, councilman from the 11th District, chair of the committee. I'm joined to my left by Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District member of the committee. To his left, Councilman Ryan Dorsey, 3rd District member of the committee. Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th District. To my immediate right, Marguerite Kern, staff to the committee. On behalf of Mayor Brandon Scott, Sophia G. On behalf of Council President Nick Mosby, Dexter Lockamy. We're going to be here today for Resolution 22-0124, our informational hearing, residential rental licensing, for the purpose of inviting representatives from the Department of Housing and Community Development and other interested parties to appear before the City Council to discuss the current rental licensing process for residential properties, problems that arise during that process, and improvements that could be made to the process. Before we begin, I'm going to turn it over to the chair in a moment for brief introductory remarks. We'll then take agency reports. We only have 2 agencies today, Law and DHCD. Council members will ask questions, and then we'll take public testimony and conclude the hearing. Councilman Burnett, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and colleagues, agency reps and advocates who've joined us today. So today, we're just hoping to have a good conversation for this informational hearing on the rental licensing process. As many of you know, a few years ago, I think in 2018, we passed an ordinance well-intended to establish a rental licensing system with the purpose of trying to take the burden off of tenants to report issues in their properties, but also just the proliferation of and variability of the conditions in which people were living in and renting in, often of which, if there were issues, they would have to call 311, allow an inspector in, et cetera. So this was an attempt to sort of get ahead of that, have inspections on the front end, improve the standard of housing that people were living in, and build a system out that way. And that was what we set out to do. Since then, we've had a few years of seeing the system in place, and a few issues have arisen that I was hoping we could discuss today. Things that, like just inconsistency in the quality or the depth of the inspections themselves, concerns about inspectors, being as thorough as the law requires or is needed to ensure that the conditions that people are living in are safe and healthy. We've come across, in my office at least, a number of unregistered properties or inconsistently registered properties. I did want to have a conversation also about the new system that's been put in place and the rollout and notification to property owners that they need the license or need to renew their licenses. And there's just a number of other issues that I know that the advocates have raised or are prepared to provide testimony today, but around just generally the overall, like some areas of improvement for the licensing process, the inspection process, because ultimately these decisions have impact on things like rent escrow cases or eviction cases that may pop up, and when you have inconsistent processes, it can lead to someone being evicted unjustly if they're living in conditions that are unsafe. Being able to convey that, or also just knowing if they're in a licensed property or not, are things that have real impact on people. And so we were hoping to have a good conversation on all of these issues today, as well as things that my colleagues may raise. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Let's start off with the Law Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeff Hochstetler with the Baltimore City Law Department. The Law Department approves this resolution for form and legal sufficiency.
Thank you, sir. Department of Housing and Community Development.
Good morning, Jason Hessler, Baltimore City Department of Housing and Community Development, Deputy Commissioner for Permits and Litigation. We've submitted a written report, and I'll stand by that report and just say the DHC is committed to enforcing the appropriate licensing and registration requirements for all applicable properties in order to promote the health and safety of our communities throughout the city of Baltimore. And then I'll stand by the rest of the report and just respond to questions and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman?
Okay. Well, I guess the first step, just to level set for all of us, can you walk us through, Mr. Hessler, the licensing, the process, start to finish, from communication to property owners to the inspection process, overall, the registration, just everything that, start to finish, that if somebody hadn't or was unfamiliar with the rental licensing process in Baltimore, what they would need to know.
Yes. So there are actually two separate processes that need to be understood in order to understand the whole scope. There is a property registration requirement in Baltimore City, properly called the non-owner occupied dwelling registration. So all properties that are non-owner occupied are required to be registered with the city. This includes rental units, it includes empty units, empty houses, vacant houses, anything that is not occupied as a primary residence by the owner. So that is an annual requirement. Excuse me. Annual requirement every January 1st to renew that registration. And there's a $30 fee for single-family dwellings to renew that per dwelling unit. There is also the rental licensing requirement in Baltimore City, which in 2019 was expanded to include all rental properties. Prior to 2019, it only included multifamily dwellings. So in 2019, it expanded to include 1 and 2 dwelling units and basically doubled the number of properties and units that needed to be licensed. Approximately 50% of our rental properties in Baltimore City are 1 and 2 dwelling units. So for the rental licensing requirement, you have to be registered. You cannot have any open violation notices. You must complete the application, which requires you to fill out contact information for yourself. If you have a property manager, if you're a business entity, your resident agent, and any other appropriate people that should be contacted should there be an issue with the property. And that includes mailing address, street address, emails, phone numbers, and names. You also have to certify that you're in compliance with state-led law requirements or that you're exempt from them. And then you have to upload a third-party inspection or an equivalency, an exemption to that. So if you had a government inspection, if you're part of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, you can use that in place of your third-party inspection. But you need a third-party inspection where the owner has hired someone to come in that is a licensed home inspector with the state of Maryland and is registered with Baltimore City to do these rental inspections. And they complete a form provided by our agency that the property meets, bare requirements of the code, basically. And once you complete all that, your license is issued. Applications are submitted online. We do have computers at 417 East Fayette Street that are available to the public and staff that can assist should anyone have connectivity issues at home. And that's the process for those two things. What was the rest of that question, sir?
The registration process writ large. I mean, I guess if you want to go into the inspectors themselves, their background, how people find an inspector, et cetera.
Yep. So the inspectors, like I said, have to be licensed as Maryland home inspectors, but then they also have to register with Baltimore City. There's no requirements outside of just providing proof of who you are and that you are licensed with the state of Maryland. I believe home inspectors are, their licenses expire every 2 years, I believe. And so they have requirements with the state to stay licensed and renew their licenses, but for the city, they just need to renew their registration after they've renewed their state license. We list everybody that's registered with us on our website, and so property owners can go through and select whoever they wish to do those inspections. They negotiate the price. They arrange for the inspectors to come into the properties. For properties that have 9 dwelling units or less, really ends up being 10 dwelling units or less, all of the units have to be inspected. After that, there is a scale of how many units need to be inspected based off of the number of units. And that scale matches up similar to what the federal government requires in relation to lead paint inspections or in multifamily properties. Those inspections are signed and submitted with the application. If questions arise as to the accuracy of those inspections or any other kind of fraudulent actions, we would have our special investigations unit investigate that, and we can revoke a rental license if necessary, or suspend a rental license if necessary, and we can also revoke the registration of that inspector.
Okay. Yeah, we can end it off.
Councilwoman Ramos?
Yeah.
Councilman Dorsey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilman, for bringing this before us. So I have a couple of questions about the non-licensed folks that are still doing business. I think one thing that just occurred, and I was just reminded just a few minutes ago that the General Assembly did pass a law that, if you're not licensed, that you can't start eviction proceedings. So hopefully that might be an incentive for people to actually, it's not a great incentive, but it's something to be licensed. But I can't tell you the number of times where I have sent unregistered and unlicensed properties to SIU to investigate. So can you tell us about that? So how that works? So you get a complaint from a constituent or from us that says, hey, this property has rental in it, and yet it's unlicensed. My understanding is that an inspector goes out and, says, yes, it's not licensed, or, Director McGinnis does his other inspections and investigations, and there's a $1,000 fine. So is that the case? And then what happens when they still don't comply?
Sure.
Which they don't, actually, by the way.
Some do.
Okay.
So, yeah, the penalty for either offering a property for rent or renting out a property that is not licensed is a citation. It's an administrative citation returnable to the Environmental Control Board should the person request a hearing. The fine amount is the maximum allowed, which is $1,000. If the fine goes unpaid, that fine would double after approximately 90 days, I think it is, and become a $2,000 fine, or a $1,000 fine and $1,000 additional fees, $2,000 in total, which would be a lien on the property. So whether it could force the property into tax sale, or at least get on the tax sale list, so that fine could be collected. If the owner attempts to sell the property or refinance or anything of that nature, it would be something that would have to be rectified. It also is high enough that the Department of Finance or the Law Department could follow through with a collections case on that if they chose. We keep a list of those properties. We do revisit that list and cite again where necessary. So that's the extent of the enforcement. If we have flagrant issues, we could file a injunction in the district court to force compliance. But we believe that the citation, the amount of the citation, is an effective tool in most cases to get somebody's attention. A $1,000 fine is pretty significant. And then while the General Assembly just passed the law requiring that you have the license, over the last couple of years, the courts have been much better in enforcing that. So we've seen an uptick in people post eviction hearing where their case gets thrown out, then coming over and getting their licenses because they want to start that process over again and they don't want to have their case thrown out. So for properties that end up in rent court for failure to pay rent, it is that is definitely causing an uptick in people getting into compliance and staying into compliance with their licensing. So that helps.
So I know that a couple of years ago, we had an issue with the system itself, so it was tough for people to actually get licensed. And so I think, you know, I know that we had talked about that, and so hopefully all that is taken care of, because what I don't want to have happen is that people say, well, I couldn't get licensed because the system was bad. And my understanding is that that is now changed, and you've got, you know, Ms. Banks is, I think, I've always had a, you know, good response from her. So is that the case, that the system is doing better, so that there shouldn't be any more excuses for why folks are not properly licensed?
Things are definitely a lot better. We had to switch over to a new system because the old system was built in-house and wasn't able to be supported by BCIT. So we went through the process of selecting a new vendor and implementing a new system that went up August 1st. So of course there's always issues in bringing something new on that we've been working through. Things are working much better. You know, so with the registration year will be January 1st. So we expect that to go a lot smoother than it has the last this past year or the year before that. Also, COVID, and that didn't help us either. You know, we ended up extending licenses and registration,
Right.
and so that became a little bit of a confusing mess for people. So my hope is, my expectation is going forward this year that things will be a lot smoother. We are still working out the payment process within the new system. The new system, at the time we brought it on, the city was just switching or about to switch over to a new payment system. The software that was selected wasn't compliant with that system, and so we've been working with the vendor and BCIT to make those upgrades so that for the upcoming registration year, we should be able to just use the registration licensing system the same as any other payments in the city, and it'll be a lot smoother.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple more questions, Mr. Chair, but I'll.
Councilman Dorsey? Councilman Burnett?
Go. I got a bunch too. So
Me too, okay.
do them in clusters.
One of the two of you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Back on the compliance piece, do we know how many of the properties that are registered? Because there are some that are not registered and not licensed, and I've sent them over. But let's just take the number of folks that, you know, do we have a number in terms of which properties and how many properties are unlicensed that we are now trying to go after?
For unlicensed, so the rental licensing, I'd say about 50% of the units out there are unlicensed.
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty significant number.
It is.
So how is the department moving, and how can we be helpful in moving to making sure that it's
Sure.
much more than that?
Yeah, it's slowly increasing. We have not done a full press on enforcement through different strategies using data sources and analyzing data, and then moving forward. That is on the horizon. We just needed to get past setting up the system and getting all that smoothly. So we are issuing it's not that we're not issuing any citations. We're doing it based off of any kind of investigations we end up having to do to find property owners for violations. We do it based off of complaints that come through, and then any other issues that a property might have, you know, registration and licensing is looked at. So we've been doing enforcement, we just haven't launched a full-scale enforcement strategy like we have in years past, where we've looked at 5,000 to 10,000 properties and sent out letters and then followed up with citations. But that's coming.
Yeah, I think that, the 50% that aren't licensed is pretty substantially low. So we want to, be able to help in any way to get the word out that people should be getting licensed. I can't believe by now that people would know, but they need to know.
Sure.
Obviously, there were issues with the system, so we wanted to give a chance for the system to be, gone, new. So you've launched that. So the issue is just making sure that we get folks licensed. So my last piece is, I think we need to strengthen the law to allow for, if there's multiple non-compliance, like purposeful non-compliance, because there are in my district that people just refuse to get licensed. We need to strengthen the law so that it's not just that you go to court to try to get them to comply, especially district court, which we know is a little slower than other places. So is there a way, I think, personally, we need to be a much stronger and utilize our powers of eminent domain or something like that to be able to say, look, we're going to move all your tenants out. We're going to give them other places to live. You cannot do business in the city anymore. I mean, we have folks that are just non-compliant in that regard. I mean, is the department looking at other ways to strengthen this law so that we actually have compliance? Obviously, we got to get the systems. We have to educate. I agree with all of that. But I think drastic measures are going to be needed if there's going to be multiple non-compliance. And in the system, in CodeMap, I can't tell as a person just looking at CodeMap, because I don't have all the ins and outs like you do, what's been paid and what hasn't been paid. So we don't know that. So I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way that we can, again, with making sure the systems are working, making sure that the education piece is there. Then when that is all exhausted and there's no more excuses, we actually have to do something drastic. So I don't know if the department is looking at that at all.
Yeah, we have not begun looking at, as you said, using eminent domain or anything of that nature. But as always, we're open to having those discussions with you and exploring what opportunities might be there and what the best path is for not just the city as a whole, but the residents that are in those houses. The bottom line and why we pushed to get this passed was that we want people living in safe
Good
housing.
conditions, yeah.
And we knew at the time that a lot of tenants don't complain about their living conditions until they're up against the wall with facing an eviction or something of that nature. And a lot of people just kind of accept the conditions that they're in because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to, they're better off having a roof over their heads that doesn't have heat than not having a roof over their heads at all. And that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue, is we want to make sure that people are living in good conditions.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go now?
Sure.
And I'll circle back on something else, but go ahead.
Okay. Can you walk us through, so if a tenant files a complaint via 311, there's an inspection that occurs, there's citable findings, whether those are rat droppings or any number of issues that should have been caught by the rental inspector. And if there's what is the threshold in which a license would be revoked? Like, what are the conditions that should be or are, from your perspective, are in place that says to you this property no longer needs to be licensed or needs to be re-inspected in order for someone to be living in it?
I think it really would be a case-by-case basis, but the conditions of the property have to be such that the property's not habitable. Now, if there's any kind of fraud within receiving that license, we do a lot of revocations within that point where they don't upload the right documents, they don't, there's untruthfulness within there, so we do revocations based on that. In regards to the conditions of the property, I think it would need to be not habitable in order to go that route. But it could also be, I don't want to, we have a lot of discretion in there, so it would be a case-by-case basis, and it could be, I could imagine situations where it's based on a totality of other properties and other things going on, and the history, and so a lot could go into that. But in general, we're trying. It's hard to find housing in the city, so if we can get the house up to code and the tenant be able to stay there and they're safe there, that's what we would work towards. But if the conditions are such that it's just not safe for the tenant, then we're left with nothing else to do but withdraw them.
Speaking to the
Withdraw them.
Okay. So one of the issues that I know has come up too is the inspectors themselves. How do you vet inspectors that may have a large portfolio of, like, say I'm a property owner that has 25 properties, and using that same inspector, I don't want to imply that there's the potential for fraud there, but there's obviously a financial incentive that the inspector now has to some degree, I would say. I'm trying to word this correctly because I don't want to imply that everybody's doing this, but like we've heard in situations in which folks feel like the inspections have been largely approved by this one inspector, and they seem to have some sort of financial interest or financial relationship with the property owner. Is part of that. First part of the question. Secondly, are there any prohibitions that you are aware of in which someone could be both a property owner and a licensed inspector? Because we from our research couldn't delineate that that's something that couldn't happen within the system.
To deal with that last question, I don't have the code section in front of me. I haven't looked at that in a while, but you can't inspect your own properties, and I think it may even say something to the effect of certain degrees of separation in there, like a relative's property or anything of that nature. So that's not permitted. Obviously, sometimes that can be difficult to ascertain, and you don't necessarily have to be a relative to have a relationship with somebody that would be close enough where we set up the program using licensed home inspectors because there was already an established educational requirement at the state level. I think it's about 70-hour course that you have to take and pass and then apply and be set up. So when we passed this back in 2019, we were moving very quickly. We were not in a position to create our own individual process, and we saw that as the best alternative. We are also not in a position to take on all these inspections internally. It would have been probably quadrupling the size of the inspection force in order to complete the inspections necessary in-house. So we went with licensed Maryland home inspectors because there is an ethical code, there is a standard, they are trained, they have something to lose, as far as being licensed. So I don't think any system is really perfect, but it did establish substantial guidelines, and then we ended up requiring that they be registered with the city so that not just any home inspector could do it, but that, and really not so that we would have to rely on the state to do any type of enforcement, because we didn't expect the state to do any enforcement around our rental licensing law. My experience with the state around something like this would be that they would come back to us and say, we license home inspectors, so we have nothing to do with your code, that's on you. So the requirement to register with the city, and you have to have that number and it has to be inputted in the registration, is that if we found someone that shouldn't be working in the city based on, not doing good inspections, lying, cheating, any kind of fraud, we could remove them from the registry, and they wouldn't be able to submit inspections completed by that person. So we'd have our own internal enforcement, even though we're relying on the state requirement to be licensed.
On that, as a quick follow-up, what is your understanding of if someone wanted to file a complaint about a particular inspector challenging their state license, what is the process for tenants or advocates to file that complaint against an inspector if they, either directly to you all if they are concerned about the potential for fraud and abuse, or if they think that it's something that rises to the level of challenging their license altogether?
Yeah, they would follow that with our office, and we would open an investigation into that to see if we could establish if there was any kind of fraud or malfeasance.
And if there were, that's something you would communicate with the state to convey what those issues are. I think the concern is obviously if it's one thing if they're, doing fraudulent inspections for Baltimore City's rental license, but they have a state license, so that doesn't mean that they couldn't simply just go somewhere else into a different jurisdiction to provide a similar service. I guess, what is your communication with the state folks if there are issues that are serious enough to warrant a challenging of the license?
Yeah. So we would remove them from our registration so they couldn't do that type of work in the city. We would forward that on to the state licensing division. I'm not sure what action they would take based on that, because it would be, we would have found a violation of our rental licensing requirements and the inspections there. And they're not licensed as rental licensing inspectors with the state. They're licensed as home inspectors. So I imagine that it may not carry the same weight, but my understanding with the state is that they take complaints and investigate all those complaints. So I can't speak for exactly what they would do, but we would pass that on to them when we had that kind of situation. Same as if we see something with a contractor or something like that, where we suspend a contract, electrician or a plumber, we pass that information on to the state for them to look into it further because they have a state license.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on that note, though, I think what we've heard a couple of reports of where, the landlord is kind of in cahoots with the inspector, right? Because the landlord pays them to do this and may pay them an extra $20 or whatever to, give them a good report. So did you have somebody going through all of the uploaded documents and, on a regular basis, or do you just wait until there's like an additional complaint possibly from us saying, hey, wait, this is still not in compliance, but yet all the paperwork is in? How does that work?
So it's a little bit of both. If we get any complaints, we're going through everything that's uploaded. We'll also go through that documentation and even look a little bit further in both those situations where something doesn't seem right. So, if we get one property that the inspection report's questionable, we'll start looking at what other properties that person may have done. And then we do some quality control as different other issues come up that may not be related to a complaint.
Yeah, I've only seen this happen once so far, but I think it's more rampant. So hopefully we can get to the bottom of that. And that's just the nature of how we did it, because we're not using our own inspectors. So hopefully, you've been able to at least, one of the things to think about is how much more capacity you need in that section to be able to make sure that, all of these, any fraud, is addressed, and to actually follow up on the people that multiple years just don't even comply. Have you started to work on that, sort of what that build out of the department, of that section of the department looks like, so that we can actually have, the capacity to be able to do all of this? Because I would imagine it's, one or two people isn't going to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, and the enforcement piece is within the Special Investigations Unit, so
Right.
they're responsible for enforcement on a number of issues, including illegal dumping and registration, licensing, short-term rental. They report homestead tax credit violations when they come across it. It's not a separate investigation,
Right.
but they take on that, and then they deal with zoning violations and the social club task force. There's probably some more things I'm missing in there, but it's all within that. We are hopefully going to be fully staffed. We have one position that's being filled, but we don't have any other positions at this point. So we're working with what we have.
So one thing that I'm concerned about also, we do have our newly arrived residents who do not speak English that obviously don't complain also because they are, afraid of consequences on their own. I know Sheriff Kogan is trying to work through some of that on his side, but how are we making sure that everybody understands that they can dial 311, it can be anonymous, and that, complaints should be, I'm still waiting on the Spanish 311, so here we are with that. But, are we, we've got to get the word out that people can make sure that there's, they're living in good conditions.
Sure. Yeah, we do have, particularly in our registration and licensing division, we do have, I want to say all, but if not all, majority of our documents are translated and online to be downloaded in at least Spanish, and I think maybe one or two in Chinese, although I say Chinese and I'm not sure if it's Mandarin or
It's
what.
Mandarin.
So we've been working on it. It has been a focus for the agency to get more and more documents translated and available. Outreach, is always a big issue. So working with the council offices, with the mayor's office in neighborhoods, we're out doing the walks and other things. SIU is always one of those walks and can connect with people. They may not actually, they may not be able to speak Spanish at that point, but they can use the, dial-in service if necessary, or an app on their phone to get some basic information across and direct them to the website that does have those materials on there. When we're out working with tenants in issues, obviously, we do our best to make sure that they understand what their rights are, and what's available to them. In a lot of cases, we do have to refer them to some of the legal service agencies because what their rights are goes beyond what we're allowed to provide them. But we can do the inspections, we can cite for it not being enforced, but they may have other rights that need to be protected that would be best protected by a legal service organization.
I want to ask about the ECB. So it's my understanding that there are times when a landlord is getting cited, they get the $1,000 and they head over to the ECB to try to appeal it. It's my understanding that there has been some issues regarding the burden of proof that they actually are renting the property, which then goes, again, to the immigrant issue because they may not, want to show their documents or, all of that. So I need to figure out why or what is the issue there in terms of, if somebody is trying to get out of paying this fine and they don't want their tenants to give them proof that like they have a BGE bill there or they have, something. I think that the burden of proof that they're actually renting a property should be that, there's people living in it. And if there's people living in it, just by citing, by being there to look at it, then, they should get the citation and they should comply. So I'm just worried that if the ECB, and we don't have them here, so we may want to have this other conversation with them, has a higher burden of proof, that seems to be an issue that we may need to address in legislation or try to figure out in a different way, because then that means if it ends up going to court, they would have a higher burden of proof, which that, in terms of how we want to try to get them to actually comply, if it's all caught up in hearings in court, then we're not getting anywhere. So, can you talk a little bit about that?
Deputy Commissioner, before you answer that, I know this isn't under your purview. I just sent a note to the Deputy CAO. We've got to get ECB hearings back online for in-person. So those hearings are only occurring virtually.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that for the record. Every other board and commission, as far as I can tell, that impacts anything related to property or land use, liquor board, zoning board, planning commission, CHAP, UDAP, whatever we're calling it now, those are all in person. So I just wanted to put that on everyone's radar. We're, you know, the time for COVID being a justification for public entities not meeting in person has passed. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
again, none of that is on you and again, I've raised that to Deputy CAO Johnson. I'm certain it'll be addressed in short order. I just wanted to say that out loud for everyone.
Thank you.
Yep, so we do have a open line of communication with ECB, so we can talk about these issues. This actually only just came up this morning when I was discussing with SIU that they've started seeing kind of an uptick in exactly what you were speaking of. And we briefly just talked about some strategies on our end that we can do to build a better case. But I don't disagree with you. Like, when we're issuing a citation, we should be able to meet the burden of proof that it is a rental property based off of ownership and occupancy, and we shouldn't need a BG&E bill showing usage or water usage or anything of that nature. Either you're living in it or it's a rental or it's empty.
Right. I mean, that's clear. It's either got people in it or it doesn't, period. So, like, I mean, I guess somebody can say, oh, it's my family, and then they don't have to be licensed, but, you know, it doesn't make sense to me why we would need that higher burden of proof. So I think that's just a larger conversation, Councilman, if you want to be involved with that too, with ECB, about, like, do we need to have it a little bit more solid in, excuse me, in the legislation as to, or in the code, I should say, and, you know, what that burden of proof needs to be.
Yep.
Because we just, like, again, we want people to live in good conditions. We don't want to have to compromise folks' safety in terms of, you know, releasing issues related to their immigration status, or if they were in a domestic, you know, relationship and needed to get out, you know, all of that. Like, it's just, so it's troubling to me that that's the case. But I also haven't heard from ECB, so there could be a, you know, a reason that they're doing it this way. But I think that's a big deal. And then on the citation side, how many citations and noncompliance sort of incidents does it take to actually, like, finally get to the court system to try to get them to comply? Again, we're just trying, you know, you can cite them all they want. If they don't pay, they'll just keep going. I mean, I have 2 cases like that in my district where the guy keeps getting cited and he's just not doing anything.
Yeah, there's not a set standard on that. I mean, we would need to have, I would say, at least 3 citations issued on a property. We're not currently pulling to do that, but as we have properties that are constant problems, we will look at that avenue. So if there are particular properties that you or anyone's aware of, they can forward them to us and we'll look into it. But we would end up with filing as a pattern and practice case.
Pattern and practice,
and so
okay.
we'd have to show that over the course of time, you know, we've attempted to get them to comply and they haven't complied, and then you know, the case goes away if they get their license. So
Sure.
but that's what we want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And again, you know, having to make sure that the system works so that they can't say, well, we tried to upload our documents and they could never be uploaded. Like,
Yeah.
all that should be done by now, and we've just got to make sure that the education piece but again, if they keep getting cited, it's just, we need to be able to do some more. Thank you, I appreciate it. Go ahead.
So, question going back to the issue of a inspector having a large portfolio of one particular building owner or property owners. Has there been consideration? Obviously, you know, people are selecting from a state license. I don't know, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. There's a certain number of inspectors, of licensed inspectors, that people are choosing from. They can, the system as it is right now, they can choose anyone they want. Has there been consideration of randomizing and matching inspectors with a property owner? So someone applies or seeks a license, they obviously have to find an inspector. Has there been any consideration of essentially the agency selecting the inspector for you through some sort of random matching, so that it isn't that you're using one person over and over again, and there's, it sort of mixes up the possibility that there is a relationship between the inspector and the property owner, whether they're a cousin or anything else. Perhaps that they could randomly select a family member. I guess that could be a possibility, but probably less likely than that.
No. I mean, that's the short answer. We haven't looked into that. I haven't even heard anyone else suggest that, so it is an interesting thought. But we haven't looked into that. I think it would present some significant challenges, particularly around, it currently operates kind of in the free market, so different inspectors charge different rates. Different inspectors work in some areas and don't work in other areas, or work on some properties and don't work on other properties, whatever they're more comfortable with, or what makes financial sense for them. If they only want to work on the west side, or they only want to work east side because travel, parking, so we're not contracting with any of these inspectors. We're just registering them and putting it out there, and it is currently whatever you can negotiate, and some landlords, large landlords, large companies will negotiate a better price based on volume, I'm sure, and it's not that there's anything nefarious going on. It's just they get one company, and that company agrees to do all their properties every so many years at a certain rate within a certain time. And if we were to try and assign a different inspector to each one of those properties, it would be a difficult task, and it probably cost them more money, and so there'd be a lot of issues around that, I imagine, and all those costs, I'm sure, are ultimately passed on to the tenant in increased rent. It's all calculated into what they're paying in taxes, what they're paying in fees, what they're paying to maintain the property. So it would be a challenge, I think, doing it that way.
Okay. Just trying to think through it. Again, I'm not implying that if you have one inspector that you're using over again, that there's anything nefarious there. But I think it's the perception of it, or it could be perceived in such a way, I think is the concern that has been raised. The other question. All right, I'm taking over as chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The other question that we wanted to raise here, sorry, I'm trying to make sure I didn't double down with. I think I asked that already. Oh, auditing. So the bill calls for, the original bill calls for annual audits of the licensing database and the licenses themselves. Can you speak to the process, where we are with that?
Yeah, since the bill's passed, it's been a challenge. We passed in 2019, and then didn't really get a full year into this licensing process before COVID hit, and then licenses were extended for another, I think it was like 19 months. And then our system, then we switched systems. So true audit won't occur until the licenses that are in the new system right now. So what we've been doing is just really the enforcement process of going through and checking based off of complaints and other issues that come up. But we haven't been in a position where we could do an audit on the system until now.
Just for timeline, so that would be, I think the new licensing system was last summer, so it'd be 2024 would be the first round of audits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And how long do you anticipate that would take, start to finish? And I guess what's the reporting process for the audit? Where does it go from there, from the audit to council review?
I imagine probably take 60 to 90 days to complete.
60 to 90, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll, I guess, double back around on that. Do you have any other? Okay. I think we covered everything that I had for this. So we can move to testimony. Unless you, Councilman Dorsey.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I will just note,
Okay.
as has kind of already been discussed here, it does seem like from the kind of testimony that we have written from Maryland Legal Aid and Disability Rights Maryland Public Justice Center that there is some sort of prevalence of a problem of inspectors letting things go when it's these private inspectors doing the work. It certainly indicates a possibility of impropriety, and it does seem like a flawed system, or and I understand that it's a constraint on. It's due to a constraint on how many inspectors we have and the inspection capacity that we have to keep up with this, that we implemented this outsourcing kind of program, but it seems really, really flawed. Do we have a sense of like what it would take for new positions to be able to handle this at scale? Like if we wanted to handle all of this in-house?
I originally did the calculations while we were working on the bill. I haven't looked at them since then, but it was roughly like 200 inspectors to get the number of inspections per year completed. 200 additional inspectors outside of what we had and what we were doing.
That's a pretty big number. Yeah, I feel like the suggestion of a random, which is brought up in the Public Justice Center's comments here, as Councilman Burnett was just discussing. I mean, it seems like we have to impose some sort of controls over who is inspecting individual units, even within this outsourcing system, because it's too much. Control, let go, it seems.
Sure. There is, it's not completely unregulated in the sense that the Department of Housing still responds to all 311 complaints and issues violation notices. And so any tenant that's out there that feels that they're living in conditions that they shouldn't be, has the ability to call, have an interior inspection. We will inspect and issue violation notices. We do it based off those 311 complaints. We also do it in conjunction with escrow actions in the district court. So there is a little bit of a safety net there in some cases. We're open to exploring changes, and if there's a better way to do it, we would look into that. I didn't get the written testimony that you're discussing, so I would like to get a copy of all that.
You
so that
definitely have
we
my
can-
copies. We've
Okay.
got some extra ones.
Yeah, so we can review all that. I'm sure there'll be testimony here, and we've met with Public Justice and Renters United and other groups on all the different issues that come up. So Definitely.
I appreciate a backstop as much as anybody else.
Thank you.
But, I knock doors, I talk to constituents, and, every time I do, I meet people I've never met before. And, when I go down, there's a block in my district that you and I both know is the most slumlord-owned block in my whole district. And when I go down that block, and I talk to residents there, and they say to me, I've got a problem with my landlord, I've got a problem with my house that I'm renting, what can you do to help me? And I say, you can call and request a 311 inspection of the premise. As many times as I've done that, I don't know of a single case where somebody has actually gone through with it. And even when they have been directly connected to our superintendent for the area and been in communication, I'm not sure that there's any one case where the tenant in that circumstance has ever actually gone through with it. And I think there's too much fear of not just reprisal, retribution of like what a landlord could do while they're in the unit, but also the landlord could do to get them out of the unit. And where am I going to go find housing? Even more so when we're talking about renters who are dependent on housing assistance, where it's hard enough to find a place to live in the first place within the limited time to find a voucher placement, but then they have to go through that again is, really, really challenging for folks. And I don't know of a single case where a constituent has ever put their money in escrow. Like where I've had a constituent say to me, I'm having a problem and I've put my money in escrow, or I know how to navigate the process of putting my rent in escrow in order to trigger then, a response that would be based on that. And so it just seems to me that while these backstops exist in practical reality for all too many people, they exist only in theory. And that we need to do something more to make sure that the inspections are even more tightly watched. And so I really like this idea of a kind of a randomized assignment. Anything to get a better handle on who we know is doing the inspection, or who to just break up the direct connection between property owner and inspector. That's just so ripe with opportunity for corruption. 200's a big number. 200's a big number. The one other thing is I have not been able to get onto CodeMap on my cell for at least a month. And I've got two phones, and actually I just replaced both of them. So I've gone from an iPhone 7 and an iPhone 8 to two iPhone 13s, and my staff members too are having the same problem for some reason. I know CodeMap is out. I can't get on it right now. And every time I have tried to get on CodeMap from a mobile device.
I promise we have not targeted you. From an IT perspective, I'm not sure why that's the case. I'm able to get on. I was on just before this hearing, and I don't have a city phone, so it's not like I'm special logged in or anything. We did have a problem a little bit over a month ago when they were upgrading. I'm not even going to pretend I understood what they were doing, but they did something that kind of kicked off certain things that were going to a website. It may be that you need to clear your cache.
I guess
but
I'm
you're
okay.
saying it's a new phone, but it may be that it's pointing to an old address because there was an address issue and they had to redirect things.
Okay.
So
I'll try to figure it out.
Definitely down a couple weekends ago.
Okay. Okay.
it's not just you.
Look, there are plenty of things in life
Scout's
that are
honor.
just Ryan Dorsey problems. It's fine. Thank you.
Sorry, one last question on this. It's fine. We're not going to vote today anyway. We're going to recess. The other question I had was about multi-unit inspections. One of the issues that advocates have raised is that obviously there's potential for capacity challenges to inspect every single unit in a multifamily building. So it's our understanding that a percentage of those units are inspected. However, it's also been raised that there's no provision that prevents the landlord from identifying specifically which units to inspect. So on this conversation of randomization, can there be consideration made that the sort of taking the power from the property owner and then there being a random number or random selection of those units being inspected so that there's a more clear picture of the variability and conditions that can exist between one unit and the next without them being hand selected by the individual paying for the inspection?
We'd be open to considering changes, but how it is and where it is, just to go back, is that it matches up with how our housing inspectors were doing the multifamily inspections when we were doing them prior to 2019. So we didn't do every unit in the property. We inspected all the common areas and then did a percentage of the units in the building. And some properties were scheduled for, an afternoon, some properties for the whole day, some properties up to 3 or 4 days, I think it was, to get the number of units needed to be inspected. One of the challenges is that, these are generally occupied units, so you've also got to coordinate with tenants. And a lot of tenants don't just want some random person coming in their unit. They aren't able to take off work and then of course COVID added a whole nother layer of I don't want strangers in my house or around my children so it is a complex situation. It's not just as simple as you sending the inspector a letter saying you must do units 1, 17, 409, 32 and expecting them to be able to do it, because those units all may have tenants that say, get out of my face. So we're open to suggestions if there's something, and I would definitely read through all of this material. We can look at whatever's out there and determine, but that's kind of how it got to where it is that it matches up with what we were doing. We ran into the same kind of challenges of tenants not wanting us into their properties, and some of it's just privacy, some of it's inconvenience, some of it's that they might have things that people don't want to see in their unit. Yeah, that's the challenge.
Quick follow-up on that part. Are there any materials that inspectors are leaving behind with the tenant in those units that they're inspecting so that they better understand not only what their right to complain, how to complain, what are the inspections entailing, or is there any information that's presented to the tenant either before the inspection so they know what's to be looked for? Maybe there's a mold patch that's under the couch that they've covered with the couch, and had they known to move it, maybe they would have moved it or raised the issue. Or maybe there's something that just isn't particularly obvious that tenant may know that they could provide the inspector with if they knew that those were the things that were being inspected in the first place. I guess, if someone's coming into my unit, I may not know what they're looking for. So
Sure.
two, I mean, and I would say if there was a way to give out information ahead of the inspection, you may get more compliance in that, like maybe somebody's just not okay with some random person coming in and just look around, but if they do know that, hey, they're looking at issues with, you know, rodent droppings or mold or a collapsed ceiling, you know, I mean, something that, hey, if I knew that I could go to this person that's a third party and not maybe they're uncomfortable with going to the property owner, but they would say something to the third party. Had they known this is what this was all about, you may get more compliance that way. But two, you know, a sort of know your rights document or a list of what the inspection either before or after, or how to follow up if, you know, you think that something was missed. How can I follow up with this person? You know, I mean, just more information for the tenant themselves, even if they're in a multifamily or if they're not. Is there been consideration of that, like sort of a leave behind document or a document that's sent to the property? Hey, your property owner has requested an inspection or requested a rental license. These are the things that we require as the city, so that, you know, they may be more aware and can advocate for themselves in a better way if they know what we're actually looking for.
So there's nothing like that currently. You know, there may be some landlords that do something of that nature. There's nothing required, nothing I'm aware of. You know, my expectation, and I know MMHA representatives are here and they may address this in theirs, but my expectation of how a landlord goes about the inspection process is that they would send out some sort of advance notice to the tenant, whether, you know, if it's a one or two family, they may call or text them. If it's a multi-unit building, sending out a letter and posting stuff in the common area or the elevator or something of that nature. But there's nothing that requires an information packet or leaflet or something that you're talking about. What is required under the code is that there's a sanitation information sheet provided and posted in the units, and it doesn't have to be posted over the mantle or you know, in the front door or framed or anything like that, but it does need to be in the unit. It could be in a supply closet, it could be in a kitchen cabinet, and provided to the tenant. That outlines what the sanitation guidelines are for that unit, whether it's city pickup or dumpster or trash chute, what days, that kind of information. So there's an avenue there to add additional information. You know, the sanitation guide is, I'd have to look at the code again. It specifies that it's towards a sanitation guide, and we have a sample guide online that landlords can use. I don't know if what you're suggesting would fit in what is existing in the code. We'd have to look at that and see if there needs to be an amendment or something of that nature. We also, on our website, for the general public, not just for the rental inspectors, we have the rental inspection form that can be downloaded. We have the guidance document for inspectors that can be downloaded. We have a flyer in English and Spanish that explains about rental licensing and registration, just kind of the generals of what you have to do and why you have to do it. So all that is available there. It doesn't get into the specific details of, you know, move the couch so people can see under it and that kind of stuff. But there is a lot of information on our website, on the rental licensing page, available to the public. And then there's other information on our housing code enforcement page that gets a little bit more into like what renters' rights are, what to look for, those kinds of things, like frequently asked questions and related to enforcement. So it's an idea there.
Yeah, I think let's talk, and we can work with some of the advocacy groups. I know that they have a lot of sort of know your rights material that maybe we could incorporate and discuss potentially amending the ordinance to codify that. I think just people knowing what their rights are, just that connection there, I think may help with compliance if they know, you know, or more, especially particularly multi-units, but even just generally like, hey, I know this is supposed to be inspected. These are the things I know that they're supposed to be looking for. And when, you know, perhaps when that inspection is occurring, they can notify the inspector, like, hey, I know this is something that you're supposed to be checking. I want to flag it for you in case there's concerns about how thorough the inspector may be. And obviously, the inspector's not going to be moving furniture in someone's place. They're going to just sort of be able to, hold the property owner accountable based on what they can see, just walking through. And so I think we should talk offline and figure something out for that, so there's just more information communicated to the resident themselves. I mean, obviously it's there online, but you still got to know where to go and what to look for. So even if it's like a small card that tells you where to find it on the website, or whatever, could make it easy for inspectors, so they're not carrying large amounts of paper, but we know that something's getting to them.
Yeah, we do something similar in relation to lead paint violations. Anytime a housing inspector issues a violation notice to a property for something that potentially could, chipping, peeling, flaking paint, a separate letter gets mailed out by regular mail to the address and to the owner, and it has tenant rights and owner responsibilities. We've been doing this since Governor O'Malley was Governor O'Malley, and it was something we started back then, and we continued to do because we felt like it was good to get that information out to a tenant, separate from, and to the owner, separate from a violation notice and separate from a certified mailing, and it just felt like it was more likely to be read, and they would be able to have that information handy and maybe do something about it.
Perhaps that's the way to do it. I mean, because you have to obviously file the registration, maybe that triggers a letter that just goes out to whoever lives here, because you may not know who the tenant, the name, or who lives there, but maybe there's a trigger there that, ahead of the inspection, something goes out automatically. But we can talk and figure that out, what that looks like within your capacity and what makes sense based on the feedback we've gotten from tenants. Do you have any more questions? Okay. All right. So we're going to move to public testimony. I'm going to start with the folks who signed in on the sheet when you came in, and then we'll move to folks online. For the people online, if you would like to testify, please use the raised hand function at the bottom part of your screen so that we know that you would like to speak. So we'll go in person first, and then we'll go to the virtual folks as well. So the first name I have signed up to testify is Kathy Howard.
I'm sorry about that. It's terrible being short. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kathy Howard. I am General Counsel for Regional Management, Inc., and also one of the legislative co-chairs for the Maryland Multi-Housing Association. This is an association of multifamily property owners and managers, and we basically came today to hear some of the information that Mr. Hessler was able to provide you, and we would be very interested in sharing or having the information that the advocacy community has given to you, because we have not seen anything like that. It sounds like there may be some very interesting ideas in there. Let me go through, Mr. Hessler indicated that there is a process that a landlord must go through in order to be able to allow inspectors to come into certain properties. Yes, it is a random process in at least in most of our multifamily buildings and management companies, that they are that there is a random units are determined to be inspected. We don't cherry pick necessarily, and the thing that you have to do is give advance notice to the tenant, assuming the unit is occupied, to make sure that they are aware that you are going to be coming in and inspecting, and to give them the chance to say, no, I do not want you to be coming into my property, because it's their property while they are in a tenancy. we will do the inspections, assuming that there is the cooperation of the tenant, and we are happy to we usually send a card along after, we send a maintenance person or a supervisor with the home inspector that does the inspection, and we will leave a card letting the tenant know that we have been here, and if they have any questions, they can contact the management company. It's pretty simple, and it works very well. So that's really, I'm sure that there are various, variations on this from company to company, but that certainly is the way that regional management, my client, does this. As far as the quote-unquote randomizing of the choice of inspectors, I'm not sure that that's even frankly necessary. It sounds like there may be some issues that may be going on out there that I'm not aware of, but one of the things that you have to keep in mind, especially in the multifamily world, is that we probably are stuck using multiple inspectors because we have so many units, and it is a sliding scale based on the law as to how many units you're supposed to do, and one inspector is just one inspector and can't do, for instance, we have 5,000 units essentially, about, I would say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000-ish around Baltimore City. So one inspector is not going to be able to, even with just the sliding scale, be able to get to all of those in the amount of time that we are allowed to have to get these inspections done. So you are dependent on, as I said, it's kind of like a natural randomization because you have to have multiple inspectors to help you if you are in a multifamily setting. And I think that's, if we can talk about if there's something that needs to be done on a smaller scale, but there is that, I just want to make sure that you're comfortable that that is something that is kind of naturally occurring, at least in the multifamily world. And the other thing that is important about that is that you have contracts with these home inspectors. They don't work for us. They work for themselves based on the standards that have been set by DHCD to pass a unit or not pass a unit. And they are going to comply with that. They don't work for the landlord. They tell the landlord or they tell DHCD what needs to be done if there is a problem with the passing of the inspection. So that's pretty much the way it works. And if you've got any questions, I'd be happy to talk about it. No? Great.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much.
All right. Next, we have Zafar Shah, Public Justice Center, or Maryland Legal Aid, sorry. Change your employer.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Acting Chair and members of the committee. I'm Zafar Shah. I'm currently the Assistant Advocacy Director for Access to Counsel and Eviction at Maryland Legal Aid, formerly trial practicing attorney in district court while at Public Justice Center for a number of years. So I'm, I've got a view of the policy issues that are before the City Council on rental licensing, but also how rental licensing plays out in district court. I do want to say about multifamily properties, and follow up to Ms. Howard's testimony, that under the current scale and the guidance that DHCD provides for rental license inspections, if you have a property of 500 units, 5% need to be inspected. So that's 26 units out of 500. And that's a problem that, whether you're talking about randomization or you're talking about notice to tenants, if only 26 units in a multifamily property of 500 units are inspected, the public's reliance on that rental license, which says it's it's inspected and officially licensed, it doesn't really mean very much and can mask many issues in many units that were not inspected. And one proposal before the City Council is in Councilmember Cohen's bill on rental licensing recently introduced, which would not only allow notice or require notice to tenants in a multifamily property, but then additionally allow that tenants whose units are not selected by the contracted inspector can affirmatively ask for their unit to be included in that rental licensing inspection process. So I just wanted to note that. But I want to focus my testimony. I've provided 7 pages of written testimony, and I can't cover all of it right now. But I do want to focus on the fact that, and not to be adversarial to Mr. Hessler, but I think the gist of his testimony, if I may characterize it, is that there is not a robust mechanism in place at the agency to review applications thoroughly, to monitor the quality of their procedures to accept applications for rental license. There's not an evaluation process, nor has there been an audit process. And I'll note that there's nothing that requires DHCD to wait longer than it's already been to conduct an audit that's required by statute every year. Audits could be ongoing. The statute deals with auditing, or requires auditing, of inspections. It does not require auditing of the procedures within DHCD to grant a license, to renew a license, suspend, deny, revoke, etc. That's a level of auditing that DHCD could be doing, and I think it would be a worthwhile endeavor because of the many issues that have been raised in advocates' written testimony. So there is a success story here, which is that more landlords are having inspections done, even if they're cursory. In our view, they are still an inspection, and there is a rising, I would say, public awareness in Baltimore City that if and when a tenant discovers the property is unlicensed, they should not be paying that landlord. In the hallways of the district court, you hear it, where with counsel provided at district court because of access to counsel and evictions, tenants are learning in the hallway that the property is not licensed, and they are adamant that they will not be paying that landlord, and they're going to raise that in front of the judge. So that's a positive. But within that positive, we're identifying, okay, that the main component of enforcement of the rental license law over the past 4 years has been private enforcement. And there are limitations to private enforcement because, one, there's no private right of action in city code, nor will there be, according to not only the law department, but also the highest court in Maryland. There's only the ability for a tenant to become aware of their rights and then not pay the landlord, or somehow be able to prove in court that they had an economic loss related to the unlicensed status of the property, and then achieve some type of restitution for amounts that they voluntarily paid to the landlord when the landlord was illegally collecting rent. We're not seeing that there are administrative actions against landlords who are known to be illegally collecting rent. We're not seeing that there's a complaint mechanism for tenants who are being who are victims of consumer abuse to notify DHCD, and they don't have an expectation, even if their attorney contacts DHCD, that there will be a thorough process to prevent that type of abuse or to achieve any type of restitution. So those are some of the limitations. But how does a tenant become aware that they're in an unlicensed property? Well, again, one of the positives is that DHCD has provided 4 different ways for the public to obtain that information. I've listed those in my written testimony. But it's sort of in spite of that positive, there's inconsistency in the information, and there's incomplete information. And really, this is the point I emphasize the most to City Council. Whether it's because of technological errors or the lack of review and the sort of lack of evaluation that I spoke about internally within DHCD, it is clear that in district court, tenants who have information showing that the license does not exist or that the license expired, are then encountering that landlords do in fact have a rental license. This isn't every case, but it happens enough that I would suggest that the belief on the district court bench is that the documents that DHCD provides to tenants and their attorneys don't really mean much. They don't really carry weight that you would think that the verification statement of a custodian of records should have in a court of law. And so the inaccuracies or the inconsistencies have added up over the past few years, such that the judiciary has many doubts about the veracity of the documents. This undercuts the position of tenants who are trying all along the way to understand what their rights are in terms of whether the property is lawfully or unlawfully being operated, whether they do have an obligation to pay rent to the landlord, and whether they have any defense if they have withheld their rent under the premise provided by DHCD that that the property is not licensed. Do they have the protection against then the forthcoming litigation to enforce the contract, where the landlord's suing for non-payment of rent eviction, suing for affidavit judgment, collections actions, and so forth? And as I stated in my written testimony, a tenant can obtain even this custodian of records statement that indicates that the property is unlicensed. And then on a dime, it becomes as though their withholding of rent was actually a violation of the contractual agreement, and now they're in jeopardy in many ways that even their attorney wouldn't have predicted. So this is a major concern, and I'd say that with the bill that was passed in Annapolis just a couple weeks ago, House Bill 36, Senate Bill 100, this is effective October 1st if it's signed by Governor Moore, and it's going to raise the stakes even higher for DHCD's record keeping and sharing of information to the public. And this is because that the bill that passed has exceptions in it. The bill says that every landlord must have a proof of their rental license, valid rental license, at trial in an eviction proceeding. It's not just fair to pay rent. It's tenant holding over. It's breach of lease. There's no longer going to be a sort of release valve for unlicensed landlords to get what they need from the court, which is the legal pressure to collect rent unlawfully. So without that release valve, you would predict that after October, landlords, these bad actor landlords, are going to rely on the exceptions in SB 100. And one of those exceptions is, for instance, that there was a delay, a DHCD delay or omission that caused the failure to be licensed. There's an exception, for instance, whereby the landlord of a multifamily property can attest that they were unable, that despite their best efforts to comply with the licensing agency, they couldn't do it. So it won't just be the rental license itself that DHCD needs to produce in these instances for the public. It will be the other documentation of the process, because it will be alleged that that DHCD caused the unlicensed status, or that that DHCD has some awareness of the good faith acts of the landlord to comply with requests from the agency, and so forth. And so it is and it will be the case that we really need the information, the documentation of the licensing to be consistent and to be complete. I would also add that it should be plain language and apparent to the public that's who has the most at stake, which are tenants who, if they were looking at the screenshots that I've provided you, may not understand the status of a property, such as the copycat building, where we have just information that suggests the property has a current status, that's a complete status, but actually also says that it doesn't have a rental license and also suggests that the registration is already expired. So I'll conclude there. I would also just say, though, that into Councilmember Ramos's note that we need the public to have more information about the need for properties to be licensed for renting. Again, Councilmember Cohen's bill would provide that the rental license, the valid license, be attached to a lease when it's offered, and that also any advertising for a rental property include the active number for the rental license. And those are going to just be, those would be measures that continue to put this access to information out front, accessible to tenants before they even get into any type of jeopardy. And, you know, aside from my criticisms, I would say that, I've looked at rental licensing schemes across the state, and this is one of the strongest. Our access to information component is also one of the better ones in the state. So there's a lot of positive, there's need for improvement. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I have Albert Turner.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Albert Turner. I work for the Public Justice Center. I am a member of the Baltimore Renters United. I'd like to thank City Council Ways and Means Committee for allowing this hearing to occur. Also like to thank Mr. Hessler for providing a lot of information on this. Public Justice Center and Brew, we've gone back and forth with Mr. Hessler on some of the issues that's been discussed, and I can say that DHCD has done has moved forward on addressing some of the issues that we've brought to their attention. We do think that there could be more, and I would like to reiterate. Thank you. I'd like to co-sign what Mr. Shaw has said as well. So I'll cut some of my testimony a little brief because I don't want to repeat him. But what I do want to highlight is one of the issues that we've been having, and you'll hear from one of the tenants that is living in a property that is unsafe, is that when there is a problem with a licensed property and we think that there is fraud that occurred in the licensing inspection, we are not given clarity on the process of how to revoke a license from a landlord where we believe fraud is involved. I can speak, we've reached out to DHCD to have an investigation into a property occur because we believe the inspection was done fraudulently, particularly property's licensed. 2 weeks later, DHCD inspector comes, looks at the property and finds a number of issues on the property, and will just outright say this property should not have been licensed. What happened? We let DHCD know about this issue, and not to say that that DHCD doesn't go and do the investigative work to make sure that this happens, but we have no clarity on what actually happened. The next steps were. We weren't aware of what happened. We've reached out, and we would like some more clarity on that, more clarity for the public in order to know exactly what the process is for revoking a license from a property where we believe fraud was involved, and also the steps that occurred in order to make sure. We actually are unaware exactly if the property was revoked, if there was an investigation that took place, or anything like that. So we would, that type of clarity is required. Another, just to address the randomization question that was brought forth, and to reply to Ms. Howard's thoughts on that. Randomizer, we wouldn't necessarily be just giving landlords one inspector for their property. We can give them 5 inspectors, 10 inspectors, just a randomized group of inspectors of which they can choose 1 from, they can choose 3 from, 4 from, 5 from. We just think that this idea would create a certain amount of space between the inspector and the landlord, so that issues of fraud or issues of a little too chumminess when you say, I'll give you something else, you just pay this, so look away from this other thing. We think that is a very objective and a very easy measure that can happen to make sure that this happens. And with that, I'll just leave it at that. I believe Mr. Shaw said anything else. I don't want to get in the way of other tenants who have firsthand knowledge of some of the issues that they've been having, but thank you.
All right, thank you. Devin Carpenter?
Good afternoon. How y'all doing? My name is Devin Carpenter. I currently live in a property that I believe my landlord obtained his license fraudulently. Prior to being in and out of the hospital for several months after getting COVID in January of 2022, I was a model tenant. I always paid my rent on time and even paid for major repairs, including a hot water heater and heating furnace. Basic necessities to live. Once I lost work due to being sick, I applied for rental assistance like so many other tenants in our city. I was approved, but then I found out that the property where I live was not licensed. This did not surprise me, based on the terrible living conditions that me and my family endured for 3, almost 4 years, okay? I didn't have a working stove for almost 1.5 years. There's water dripping down in the wall of my son's closet. There are mice holes in both corners of his room. When he plays in there, I play with him just to be on the safe side, okay? There's mold in my basement. There is an infestation of roaches and rats, so the rats are downstairs and the mice are upstairs. I paid for multiple exterminations, not knowing that it wasn't only my responsibility, okay? When my landlord told me that he would repairs, like most people, I believed the empty promises. When I would fix things, it would come off of my rent. I should have known that something wasn't right then and there, okay? But soon I understood that these were empty promises. I lived in constant fear of these conditions that are negatively affecting my 2-year-old son's health. I found out in October of last year that my landlord obtained a rental license illegally, I believe illegally, okay? Less than 3 weeks later, I had an inspector from DCHD come in, and my property alone has over 30 violations. Not little violations, we're talking major violations. My basement window is not even connected. It's been like that since I moved in. He nailed it in. I've just been working with it. I mean, it's affordable, it's in my bracket for me to get to work. I'm just doing the best that I can as a mom, okay? I had issues before my son, and then once he came, I began to start texting my landlord to try to get something done, to get some type of help, because I have a baby in the home. I was told by the inspector from DCHD, all I had to do was request from property management or my landlord that to come in and do a mold testing. Still hasn't been done. My son's had breathing issues. I've just been trying with these people. I never heard of an inspector coming into my home until I actually called out and reached out to 311, and I've had multiple conversations with 311. Now, my landlord got a violation in 2018 prior to me even moving into the property, so he knew that I was not supposed to move into the property. I'm trying to figure out how this property could have a valid rental license, and he's went to court and pled guilty to the violation, so he had a $500 violation, okay? And now we're back at inspecting again. Nothing's been done. I I wrote something down, but I'm kind of going off of track now because we've emailed him. I've even had my advocate email housing to try to get this license revoked. Just on a moral standpoint, like, would you live in it? Would you live in it? If that's all you have, that's all you can do is live in it. Now, because I'm doing things the right way, I'm getting retaliatory evictions. He wants to evict me for every little thing. The trash can don't have a top out front. Well, the mice can come right into my home anytime they want. What does a trash can matter? I called DHCD to do their own inspection 3 weeks after my landlord got a rental property. It was cited for, like I said, almost 40 violations. I still live in these current conditions. Despite all of this, my landlord maintains a licensed property, okay, where he can continue to charge rent. Not to mention the 3 years that I paid rent where he wasn't licensed and knew that he wasn't licensed. It's been into the court system. No one has cited him. I heard him earlier mention $1,000 fines for landlords who were collecting rent and weren't licensed. My landlord doesn't have a fine. My landlord still believes that I am entitled to pay him for the time that I lived there and he was not licensed. It's actually in an eviction notice. I've never had an eviction notice. I'm also a first-time renter. So a lot of the things that I'm learning now, I literally had to learn on feet firsthand. I didn't know that the laws cover me just as well as it covers them, okay? Even though the laws cover them, I feel more. Because as a citizen, I pay taxes, I pay my rent on time, I pay my water bill, gas and electric. You know, I just want to live in a house that's livable. That's all I want. Now I'm facing, like I said, an eviction from a landlord who isn't even a landlord. I had breach of lease contracts. I'm taking off of work, running backwards and forwards to court because that's all I'm able to do, go to self-help, public justice to try to do it. Now, my job in jeopardy. It's like I'm picking and choosing my battles. But this battle, I believed I needed to be here for, not only for me and not only for my son, but for other renters who are going through the same thing and just feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of us give up before we can even get to where I am right now. But I refuse to give up so that maybe I can help somebody else who will be a first-time renter. Not saying that it's completely DHCD's fault, because it's not. It's a lot of places that are like that, but some of these emails could have been answered. I've been going through this since August of 2022, last year. I can't get help because a lot of those cases, that legal aid and public justice, they can't accept money for those cases. My situation is a situation where I should be in civil court. I should be able to stand up for my rights just as a human. Hot water, I waited 2 weeks for a hot water heater until I got paid to fix it because my landlord wouldn't fix it. I've sent him pictures of rats by my stove. He says, where are they coming from? Out of the cabinet. Is somebody coming out to help? I can't pay for another. The exterminator said, it's no point of us coming back out, Ms. Carpenter, to your home because the home isn't sealed properly. So basically, you're just throwing your money out the window. It'll suffice, but it'll never go away. This is constantly what I'm going through. Like I said, I just want to be able to help others and my position too. I live in South Baltimore, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Baltimore City. Why can't I at least live in a comfortable home so that I can lock the world out and don't have to worry about it? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't. I have to, Mommy, what kind of bug is that? Well, Ian, that's a roach. Because it's nothing Mommy can do. Like, I can keep complaining. I can keep fussing with this man. Now it sends me to court where I look like I'm the problem. I won't let them enter the property. Well, you want to come on days that I'm scheduled for work. When is the pool? When do we get a chance to start getting the same account? We're held accountable. If my trash lids aren't on my trash can, I get a fine. If my door is broken and my home gets broken into, like, who helps me with this? It's a clause in my lease that says if the problem is over, if I keep calling him out to fix things that are wrong with the home, I have to pay $100. How? But I'm a first-time renter. Like I said, I didn't know the laws. No, that's for the things that I mess up. If I need you to keep coming out because my son wrote on the wall or he's constantly flooding the toilet, that is something, not things that are already wrong with the property. I never received a lead paper with my first lease. Never. Every time I contact my landlord won't even answer me anymore now that he knows that I know that he's not properly licensed. I know it's a 2-minute thing, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I just really think that something needs to be done in the law to protect us, because there are some bad tenants out here, but what about the good ones who are upstanding, who are doing what we're supposed to? We're not just taking a free ride, oh, because he's not licensed, I don't have to pay rent. No, I want him to get licensed, and I want him to fix the things that are wrong in my property so that I can live comfortably. That's all that I want. And I've contacted I even went down to the other side of Fayette Street to speak to the Department of Housing supervisors, because I just want something to get done. I don't want to give up like most people. They make it so hard for us tenants to keep pushing for our rights that they give up. Most people give up and move out of the properties. I'm not giving up, and even if I do move out of the property, I'm gonna keep going. You'll probably see me again, I promise you. I promise you. I promise you. That's all I needed to say.
Thank you. And it looks like Jason's trying to connect. I was going to ask Jason to do that. Thank you. Next, I have Detrice Dowridge.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Detrice Dowridge. I'm a tenant organizer with Baltimore Renters United. There are plenty of buildings in this city that tenants reside in that shouldn't be licensed because of the conditions, specifically the unsafe and unsanitary conditions. I'm not understanding why these buildings are passing and are able to get or maintain their license when there's clearly visible defects. I have worked with tenants who have witnessed firsthand the behavior of unprofessionalism. I have worked with tenants who have witnessed firsthand the behavior of unprofessionalism by inspectors. Some inspectors have even displayed clearly that they are a bit too friendly with the landlords, if you know what I mean. As a tenant organizer, I have plenty of pictures and videos from buildings I've worked with tenants detailing the unsafe and unsanitary living conditions, not only in the tenant's home, but in the common areas in the buildings as well. Can DHCD explain why are these buildings licensed? Because clearly, these buildings should not be licensed. I agree with Councilwoman Odette Ramos that there needs to be stronger laws in place to be assured that landlords are in compliance with keeping their building up to code and it's time for DHCD to stop making excuses for a system which is clearly flawed and have been flawed for years. So in conclusion, I would like to say, tenants are tired. I work with tenants every day who are tired, who are fed up of living in conditions, making it within their mind, they're being blamed for the conditions, which is not their fault, especially the defects of the building, the outside of the building, and it's just enough is enough. Tenants shouldn't have to be forced to live in horrible conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see anyone else. There's people signed in, but those are all the people who checked. Okay. Yeah, if anybody, that's all that check the box, but if you'd like to come up, you're welcome to. Just introduce yourself. Just introduce yourself so we have it for the record.
Yeah, hi, my name is Charles Armstrong. It's me. I'm the tenant that got evicted because I complained to DHCD. So, the ironically dilapidated infrastructure of DHC and CELS are a page in the story of how I got retaliatorily evicted with a $22,000 appeal bond, and I wasn't almost able to even fully vacate. So, Judge Latina Green cited local case law demanding back rent for all the time that I had rent strike via appeal bond for citing that periods of non-licensure, if they're attributable to the tenants, that we are somehow now magically liable for all the back rent because of these violations without the landlord meeting any burden of proof. So these fake claims of violation being my fault when they're entirely building wide, like elevators being broken, speaking of which, I got a picture right here if you want to see it, but apparently fire can't help get elevators up to code. And if you don't have a pre-existing disability when you move into the building, I guess you're just SOL if you somehow injure yourself and now need an elevator, or you need to move out furniture like I did. You cannot get them to fix the elevators. So there's false claims made by the landlord of denying entry to make repairs, and I could not get in contact with an inspector that I had let in 3 different times to get them to testify that we did let them in along with the building staff. There's claims that we destroyed walls with no floor plan on file, that the judge was, well, I guess there's no plans, there's no any documentation saying that there's anything else but what the landlord said. So I guess we know who wins in the he said, she said of landlords. So there's untested outlets or code complying outlets that have damaged my appliance. When I complained of this wiring, I was faced with my first of probably like 5 or 6 eviction cases 2 days later. What are even the protections for complaining tenants? I appreciate how many of you brought up the point that people are not going to be willing to complain if they end up getting evicted, like I did for doing so. So the burden for proof for retaliatory eviction is astronomical. In a state where there's only 1.49 pro bono lawyers for every 10,000 indigent denizens of this state. Preempting these retaliatory evictions with unilateral denial of any summary ejectment procedures to unlicensed landlord might be the only answer. At the very least, licensure queries by tenants should be allowed to be made anonymously. We shouldn't have to present ID if we can just be subject to retaliatory eviction with no inspector to appear on our behalf, like just weeks later. So in order to stop rewarding landlords for non-licensure with access to ejectment proceedings and ability to get back rent, I would like to see this fixed with more DHCD inspector follow-up.
If you're struggling to speak, you're welcome to pull it down if you're.
Oh,
if you
yeah,
want,
yeah.
If you want to.
I would like to see this fixed with more DHCD inspector follow-up. I'd like to, as Albert suggested, see the contracting of completely randomized private inspectors in case of emergency, allowing for second opinion in the suspicion of bias, and hopefully we can standardize the records on these websites. I just went on this morning and could not load any of the images from the leaks that I had in the building that I was evicted from. So if there could be a standardization with these records, and if they could be held to a standard such that they are mandatorily to be included in court record when allegations are being made about code violations. We would also like an ongoing relationship with DHCD and records to recoup losses from both personal injury and permanent property damage due to leaks and code violations. Escrow won't buy me a heater when building temps stay below 60 degrees every winter. 2 different buildings this has happened to me in. Won't replace my short-circuited wiring, the short-circuiting of my work computers, and it certainly will not pay for the mail lost in insecure mail rooms and the mail that I do get that gets damaged by the prolific leaks in this swampy city. These implementations may very well benefit from tenant union oversight and a clearer path to the revocation of licensure for landlords who clearly do not deserve it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wanted to testify that didn't? Come on up and just say your name.
Hello. Hi, my name is Heather Johnson. I am a housing justice organizer for Communities United. And I just want to uplift that our tenants shouldn't have to show up here to be able to have their voice heard. Our tenants should not have to live in housing that is unsuitable for anybody to live in. I would ask if anybody would want to trade places with one of the tenants that spoke today. No offers? Okay. We need to change that. If you're not willing to live there, neither should they. And I just wanted to also uplift that so many times we have these tenants that are coming and they don't know their rights, as she was saying. And I would love to participate in an ability to show our tenants what their rights are, especially first times, or second time, or senior homes. I feel like that should be facilitated, and we need to make sure that we provide support that we're giving information to DHCC so that they can do what they need to do, but we also would love to have that accountability back. So if you need something from the tenants, we're asking for that to also be done for the landlords, and that's all for me.
All right, thank you. So it doesn't look like anyone online has used the raise hand function to speak. So with that, we will conclude public testimony. I do want to thank you all for taking your time to come out, particularly the tenants who've taken time off work, presumably, to be here to raise these concerns. We put this bill in to lift up some of the things that we were hearing in my office, whether those were in multifamily conditions or row houses. We were hearing a lot of the same things that you all have shared today and wanted to lift up those concerns in this forum. And so I want to thank you for joining us and sharing that testimony, because it's helpful for us as policymakers and as agency leaders to get this feedback on a bill that's been around for a few years, but obviously has some issues that need to be addressed because it's not accomplishing the goals that I think we collectively set out when we put this into code, because we didn't want tenants to have to, the whole point of the rental license was so that you wouldn't have to the burden be on you as the tenant to report and potentially face retribution, but clearly that's still occurring, and so there's some loopholes that need to be closed and information that needs to get out to tenants ahead of time. I'm a big proponent of tenants' rights, renter rights, just information getting out, because I believe information is power. Once you have that power, you understand what your rights are, you can better advocate for yourself. Particularly, I was a first-time renter as well not too long ago, so I get it, and I've learned a lot as a policymaker that I probably wouldn't know otherwise if I was not. And so that access to information is critical, and we will continue to work with DHCD on systems improvements. And I would offer, it looks like Jason has handed out some contact information, so folks, we do expect to do some follow-up with folks who've taken the time today to try and get that resolved, because you did take time off to join us, come all the way down to City Hall and speak and share very personal information that I know is not easy to share. And so I want to thank you for that, and for the advocates who've also joined us as well. We are going to recess the hearing. We're not going to vote today. Recess meeting, we can bring this back up in a few months or so to see where things sit with things like auditing, updates to the system. It sounds like we're going to have some conversations with you all around what kind of information should be going out, and potentially amending the code to codify that. I'm a big proponent of codification, so that if there's changes in staff, changes in the council, that these things are still codified and there's the accountability measure there. So we will be looking at additional legislation to toughen up the law, and it sounds like my colleague has some ideas as well. So we will continue this conversation. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you all again for your time. Please look around your seats, make sure you don't leave anything behind, and have a good, safe day. Thank you. We are now in recess.